Hello, this is J.N.S, and I want to do another excerpt reading from my first book, The Nakhti Queen Mothership, as well as my evolution of thinking since writing this book, because I am going to be doing a second edition covering the Queen Mothership in North America in particular, as well as adding some more theoretical components to the second edition that can be enacted in 2022, like an actual framework that can be that transcends beyond just an ideology and more of like a blueprint of how to actually lay this out in terms of the Queen Mothership governance that I talked about in the first book. But what I want to do for this video is actually focus on the tenets and the values of what could be implemented in 2022 and beyond, because these tenets and values transcend any particular landmass and even a particular time period for that matter. So I do want to lay that as the basis for the direction that I'll be going in when I cover the Queen Mothership concept in North America in particular, and then we're going to be focusing on how the Queen Mothership process looks amongst Black Americans specifically. But just to rewind back to 2019, when I really started to wonder how could melanated people globally get in such a subjugated situation, like what was happening prior to colonialism. And to be honest, these ideas were being discussed within the BWE movement, particularly those who were more so into the self-improvement aspect of BWE. What I wanted to do was study the more intricate details besides just the abstract idea of what the precursors to colonialism could have been. That was interesting to me, but I'm like, if such an abstract idea can be deduced just from like a logical standpoint, well then we can probably empirically prove this by looking at some of the history of some of these tribes, or even the oral histories from some of the elders in particular tribes, to see like how did this really happen. So it was based off of studying pre-colonial tribal affairs and social structures, as well as like gender dynamics, usually from the nobility class. So I was specifically looking for how melanated men and women related to one another, and my initial goal when doing this research was to understand again, how could melanated people, and by that I mean obviously those with eumelanated, which is brown skin, get into such a subjugated state. For people with the population numbers for people with melanin skin, that's pushing around 33-34%. And when you look at our current situation in terms of who's running the infrastructure, we see that that's being ran by a population that represents about 10% of the world. So that, to me, the math is obviously not mathing with that, and I wanted to know what was going on, like for that to even happen at the cusp of the transatlantic slave trade that allowed for these European colonizers in particular, who at one point in time had to be civilized by said melanated people. We all know that, at one point in time Europe was ruled by melanated people, and some say that's 800 years, 1,000 years, whatever, however long it was. We have some documents that prove that there were melanated people over there and in rulership positions. So again, a lot of stuff just wasn't adding up to me in terms of like, well, how does 10% of the world's population get into such a power where everywhere you look where there's melanated people globally, they're subjugated, by the effects of that colonialism and slavery. So that to me was like, I need to know what kind of actions allow for that to take place. So the research I was doing for this Queen Mothership does focus on the tribes of Africa, and I was studying what was going on before like each empire fell, and what was occurring in their very social structures that allow for, again, these random people to just enslave their people. And then I just noticed this pattern. I just keep noticing a pattern as I was doing research for various empires of tribalism, but also of rifts between the nobility class and the structure itself, and the governance was breaking down in terms of how they were set up. And by that I mean a system in which you had male king rulerships along with a council of queen mothership, or female queen rulership with a council. So we started to see that pop up, and I thought that that was solely a an African thing, and that's not the case. From what I'm learning, that this some structures, similar structures, also occurred over here in North America as well. So that was very interesting. So these systems were either matriarchal or diarchal, in the sense that they had specific roles. Now, this is not a system that's based off of gender reversal or even the removal of gender itself. That's not what we're saying when we talk about this Queen Mothership. We're just talking about how we always had gender roles, and you can have, and within those gender roles, the roles have different functions, but they're still equal. And that was the way, the outlook on the world, that I'm noticing with certain, based off this research in these particular tribes. The gender roles exist, but they had different, it was like, okay, you may have different function, but there's still this egalitarian system. You guys have to understand that the dichotomy of saying that an egalitarian system is equated to the removal of gender roles. That is not the same thing, by no means. So I think I've made that clear. But in the description of the book itself, I talked about how the Queen Mothership, the Queen Mothers in particular, were very important political figures who had authority, and even some were actual rulers among certain tribes. So there were always like these male and female counterparts in all aspects of the political hierarchy, which was really interesting. So I do give examples, like specifically of where it takes place in Africa, as well as the geographical reasons for why this system even, manifested. Another thing that I want to say is that the Queen Mothership itself is not necessarily synonymous with matriarchy. Sometimes that could mean matrilineal. So there's some distinctions with that. And again, there was never this frown upon against male rulership. It was just that a lot of the councils, a lot of the organizational planning were in essence being done by women. So I would sum up that one component of the Queen Mothership means that the hierarchies and the domination of one gender by the other simply did not exist. And the reason why I wanted to cover this, because there's this running notion that emphasizes African people in pre-colonial history. Whether you identify with them or not, the way the history is being told is a little annoying to me, because I keep hearing people say certain things in 2022, and it's like, what? It's not mathing. So I'm like, okay, is there a breakdown clearly in the education system globally? Because it's not even so much Americans saying that, it's like some of the stuff that we're seeing, it's like the African people themselves are infantilizing themselves by making it seem like they were just sitting innocently in Africa, and the white man just came with his gunpowder and just took over, and there was nothing that they can do, and they just enslaved them, and there was nothing they can do because they had guns. That is annoying to hear, because it's like, okay, this all started because of some nonsense, and if we don't get to the real nitty gritty of how this all popped off, everybody's walking around in denial. And now a lot of Black Americans are pushing back on that notion, like y'all just sitting idle and didn't know what to do, and just like a lot of us are like questioning, like, nah, don't nobody just come over in your place not knowing the water supplies, not knowing where to find water, how to build a boat. Like, they come over to your shit and just take over like that. Nah, something's not adding up. You're not telling the story correctly. Something is amiss here, but when you study that actual pre-colonial history, you see anything but a motherfucker sitting idle in no hut. And that's a fact. You're gonna see the opposite. In fact, you will see all of those empires, the trade, the business enterprise, their functioning governments, their navigational capabilities, their colonialism, and their treachery. This was a whole lot of money talk. you know. And to be honest, you know, salt was used in currency in many of these places, and I'll get into like the specifics of that in a bit. But the salt was used as the money because it was rarer than gold. This whole narrative that they want to tell us in terms of, you know, oh, he take over and we just got colonized. No. So there's clearly something amiss. But what we fail to understand as a people is that running a superior society does not mean that it's righteous. Does not mean it's a righteous system. And this is what black people get confused all the time. That you can romanticize the empires as if they were not involved in the fuck shit. And to be honest, that romanticizing bullshit, that romanticizing the empires of Africa is what contributes to our downfall today. Because we don't study the actual geopolitics, the actual strategy or lack thereof that caused all this stuff to pop up. Is you just completely gloss over details that should be paid attention to for anybody to learn the lesson from. Because you're removing the culpability of the fact that they could be the colonizer and that they can still play that role today. If they played that role back then, when it came to different areas and different land masses, then they can certainly play that role today. Whether it's proxy warfare, whether it's being used as a pawn, whatever. So it's the same thing. So that's why we don't want to romanticize and keep it a buck as how all this shit popped off and who was the middleman, who was the gatekeeper, who left the door open, who was the motherfucker that caused all this shit. And it's not always as cut and dry as the history will have you believe. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to briefly give you the names of the empires that I'm talking about so that you can see that this is like real stuff. And this was for some research from a series I started working on. This was called the Black Man series. This is on my all this stuff is on my other channel. And that one was just pretty much covering like a breakdown of like 20,000 years of civilization, like 100,000 years of writing systems, 35,000 years of mathematics, and about 20,000 years of architecture. So I pretty much was asking some philosophical questions about who created melanated men and why were melanated men created, because there were the philosophical questions that I wanted to get people to think of is like, well, if you were at one point globally, whether it's in North America, Africa, South America, whatever, what have you, even Europe, if you at one point had rulership, under what circumstances can that happen again? Why don't you have that now? What contributed to it? So it's just like really existential questions about like stuff that's just not adding up. The history from all four corners of the world, if you ask me, is not being told correctly. That includes obviously the history that Black Americans are being told about North America itself. But some of it is true. But what happens is when you leave out such huge chunks or just leave out such disparate narratives, or when they're taught, I would say, separately from one another, like the history of Africa, and the way that they tell that in terms of the transatlantic slave trade, it gives a very myopic view. They're not telling how Africans themselves even came over to North America or went over to Europe or whatever, or they just leave out huge chunks of other types of slave trades, whether that be the specific slave trades and the Indian slave trade. And I argue that when you add all three together, or you account for the history of all three, be it the transatlantic slave trade, the Pacific slave trade, and the Indian slave trade, that's when the picture just gets a little more clear to me, including like, especially when you include like the 800-year rule over in Europe. That to me gives a better picture of what the fuck was really going on. And not just the story that they tell us. Now, the question about how did we get into this situation, or who were the factors involved, because I knew it wasn't just no white man that y'all claim came from a cave. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. If you spent 800 years civilizing him and ruling him, how the fuck did he get back over in Africa able to do what the hell he was able to do? How did he learn it? Where did he learn it from? Because when you met him, you said he was scratching his ass. You said he came out of a cave. You know, you said this things about him. This is what's written. Like, you said that's what you saw when you first came into contact with him. So how all of a sudden, in a span of 1,000 years, they just all of a sudden know how to come back and colonize you. You know, the math don't be math. And so that's the question that spurred my obsession with this research about the Queen Mothership, because I started getting a lot of like downloads, and I know a lot of people may not be into the spiritual intuitive stuff, but I started getting a lot of messages about certain things. You know, I started to get the message that there was a breakdown in the social structure itself, and that really just made all the answers come clear to me. But I wanted to see if the concept could be found in other melanated people across the globe as well. But if anybody is interested in like in the Black Man series, you can find that on my other YouTube channel, and it is titled, I think I'll just link it in the description. But when I did this research, I had about like 72 sources, and I do show the sources in one of my videos on my old channel. And I believe I didn't even get to show them all, because I mean, that's obviously boring to just show sources, but it was really in-depth research. And I think I used like the University of Pennsylvania. They have like this research center now. They call it African American Research Center or something like that. So the name is a little bit outdated, but as far as like the books of all of like Black scholars, Black American scholars, African scholars, that stuff was on there. Like, it was like a lot of information to pull from. And so in that sense, you know, that's what really helped me be able to do that research. And I do have to say that I did enjoy it. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I found some interesting shit. Now, the Black Man series that I did cover on that other old channel only covers the good. I did not get into, you know, some of the other stuff that I had found, because I did want people to see that they were not sitting ducks. What I was looking at and some of the shit I was reading about, to be honest, I didn't see much difference between, like, say, how the Roman Empire was ran, or say like how the Greek Empire was ran. Now, you know, the Greek thing with the young, with, you know, how they do that boy love stuff or whatever. I only found one tribe that was into that. That was melanated. Only one tribe. I do have to say that. That was based off of some sort of manhood training where it was believed that if you had like the guidance of like an older male figure, and that you take on some of his bodily fluids, that it will help you into your manhood. Obviously I don't agree with that, but that was just one tribe that has that belief. I think that practice is banned, but it was practiced like within the last 50 years, so it's not even like it's like something from ancient. Like there are boys, the grown men, that remember that ritual. And I didn't even cover that because I mean, I just didn't feel like that was relevant to like what the point I was trying to make in my book, so I didn't get into that. But as far as like how the Roman Empire gets kind of glory, but also kind of demonized for some of the shit that they were doing, and how they were pulling stuff like, or even you know, say like Athens or something. To be honest, from what I was looking at, I'm like, I see similar to an extent as far as the trading. So as far as courts, occult sciences, various forms of government structures, universities, whatever. But that's just the good stuff. But I also saw some fuckery. I saw all empires were selling slaves, selling each other, exploitation, the ability to conquer or to get conquered. Like, it was still some ruthless shit going on. Tribalism, all types of human trafficking, women, sex trafficking, all types of stuff. It was still some crazy shit going on. So, you know, it was the same shit. Niggas setting niggas up for power. And when it comes to getting absolute power, you don't realize how dark people would go to maintain power, and what that requires. So the Queen Mothership system at that point had to go, because it was a check and balance system. In some instances, the Queen Mothers would have veto power, and then sometimes they had final say for decisions, or they could set up a coup against the king if the king was just doing dumb shit and just becoming just ruthless, you know. So in other words, when the black men wanted to get more involved in the slave trade, like on a global scale, with the European and the Indo-Arab, is when we start to see this Queen Mothership councils and this system of check and balances just kind of like fall to the wayside. They were the first on the chopping block, like literally, not just like in a figurative sense. So it was not so much that like this white guy was so powerful that they did everything on their own and came over with gunpowder, you know, and it was never that way. It was always collaboration. It was a business enterprise that went wrong, and it's something that we can prove, I would say, just through logic. So at that time, the white man was playing more so of the middleman in this slave trade stuff, but you know, what if you don't have to play the middleman and you just can renege on a treaty or renege on a contract or a deal that was made, and you just, so to me it just looks like a business deal going wrong, where it's like, okay, we're gonna just stab you in the back and then play winner take all in Africa. Like, this is what this is about, and it just fucked up the game, because the shit got all over in North America and South America. The stuff started just, you know, messing it up for brown skinned people who were outside of Africa. So this really messed things up, and I want to give a scenario of this idea of this white man playing the middle man or whatever. So just imagine, you know, you got two tribes. Just imagine. I'll just give an analogy, rather. I'm not even going to break down. I'm gonna give you an analogy. Just imagine two black men. They got their own vehicle. They in the car. Each car is facing each other. They coming up to drive towards one another. And in the back of their car, though, we'll just say truck. In the back of their truck, they got booty. They got, and by that I'm literally talking about like goods. When I say booty, like the spoils of war. They have resources. They have all these things in the back of each truck that they're willing to trade, including even humans. They have everything. It's ivory, salt, gold, whatever, in the back of this truck. Each with maybe different types of resources, but they're going to make a trade of some sort, enterprise trade. So then they see also this white guy. He claims, you know, he has some mirrors. He claims he got some things from Europe and wants to look to see what he can trade as well. His truck is not as robust. They don't have as much in the back of that truck. But he has things. He has things to trade. But you know, he's coming in from a position of weakness because they're from Europe. He's coming from Europe. He has more to gain on the world stage of patriarchy in all of this. You know, he's with the least amount at this point. So he's thinking, okay, how do I get up on top? He's been ruled for 800 years by melanated men. So he's thinking, okay, how do I get the one up in all of this? I gotta find a way to get the one up, because right now I'm getting the short end of the stick out of these deals. So the two black men, they're driving up. They're from different tribes that historically have some animosity. Tribes that have historically stabbed each other in the back at one time. They come, make a deal, make a treaty, whatever, for whatever time until war break out, whatever. But occasionally they, as they're doing their trade, they still can bicker a bit. So things can break out, or they can break out into argument over negotiating the trade itself. They break out into argument often. So they get out the truck. You know, they're having this argument. They're trying to negotiate and barter, but having that underlying animosity. Still that underlying animosity. And here comes the white guy. He's driving up. And, you know, he realized, okay, I did make a deal. I did tell these motherfuckers that I was going to wait until they do their trade first. Then they're going to trade with me. I'm going to get kind of like the leftovers, but whatever. You know, whatever. But he starts to get this idea, like, these motherfuckers is arguing like a motherfucker. They fighting. They left the keys. I see where the keys is at. Motherfucker done left the key in the engine. Motherfucker. I see something going on here. And imagine that motherfucker. They may have an old shotgun. But don't think that the Africans didn't have shotguns too. They got shotguns in the back too. But they just arguing and not seeing the play. And the white guy just says, hey, while they doing that bullshit, I can exploit this situation. I can just take the keys from both of these trucks, get one of the trucks, and kind of just take out these two men. Or I can take out one of the men and at gunpoint hold this other nigga and you know, have him do some bidding for me as well. So I'm just gonna see how I can get in control of all of this. I can get in control over both of these trucks, loads of resources and booty and slaves and all this stuff. And now that I done took just two of these chiefs out, two of these men out, you know, I got a little more leverage, and I can use him as a bartering chip. I'm gonna keep one of them alive, and we'll use him. Matter of fact, we'll make a whole new deal. Now I can just probably still manipulate this man into thinking that we actually cool, and then I did him a favor by taking out his tribe, and we could split those goods. How about we just split those goods in the back of the truck from your former rival who you were planning to do trade with? You took him out. I took him out for you. Hey, we're still cool. Look, we walk away with, you know, and then this cycle happens again. Like, imagine, you know, so to me, that's just one analogy, but this scenario can be found with particular chiefs, particular individuals who we know the name of, like, say, like Alfonso the First, Alfonso the Second. We know, like, we can actually point to some people that had contracts, like letters that they wrote, say, like, to the king of Portugal, and how, you know, it was like, okay, we'll send people, if you give us ammunition to wipe out this other tribe, you know, we'll give you their land. But then the Portuguese guy says, the king of Portugal says, no, we'll take you out too, enslave you. What the hell? Like, we can enslave your tribe too. Like, we have leverage now. You gave us this land. We had guns. We gave you guns to take out that other tribe. But now you're in a position of weakness because we're going to take you out too, because it's more of us, because you didn't team up with the other tribe to think that we would actually be a threat. So this is what was happening. This scenario kept happening over and over. Like, oh, it's not my, I don't have to worry about it. That tribe I didn't like that tribe anyways. He came over, took over their shit, fucked them over, helped the other tribe do it. They ain't got nothing to do with me. Oh well. And the same thing, honestly, from what I'm learning, and because, you know, last year I've just been learning more so about North America stuff, and to be honest, some of this shit still is happening in North America. It happened in North America too. So that's really some wild shit, you know. But so as far as like the Queen Mothership role and all of this, like where does that fit in? Well, again, those councils, the check and balance system was like dismantled because of the quest for more power. I mean, and if it's like, you know, if the king has to have, like, go through this council and they're blocking certain actions, or they're blocking the women that are doing is veto everything. So it's like, well, shit. I can get a couple of my men out the army to just check y'all, to take y'all out, to do whatever we want. Like, so to be honest, this is what was going on. Now, again, make no mistake, there are some of these melanated bloodlines never lost their power. Some of them went underground. Some of them kept their power, and they still play it hand today behind the scenes. And this is something that is very controversial information. But the main goal is still the same power. It's the same enterprise. And because melanated people have been convinced that it's just one group that is behind all of this, so they don't focus on how people could come through the back door that look like you. So we're just looking at a guy who just got in on the play in terms of global rulership at this current time, in this current space and time, because this was not always the play, this was not always the case, by no means, globally. So that is why this research to me was important for my own personal curiosity. But when we see like a concerted effort by the priesthood and the merchant class and the nobility to overthrow certain forms of rulership, and be it that Queen Mothership, this was meant to usher in a certain age, you know. A lot of it have some occult underpinnings in it that we will not get into because it's not relevant. But also, it's meant to usher in the age of organized religion, certain forms of rulership, authority. So it was an age where certain energy was put into a slumber, and particularly the divine feminine went into the spiritual world. It went into the underworld, to be frank, and this happened in the spiritual world and in the physical world for a time being, for the last 1500 to 2000 years. So you're going to see us going back into a whole new day And I'm talking in the code, so people who know, they know. If you don't, it is what it is. So right now we're seeing this talk about being more ushered into a new day. We're talking about the age of Saturn, the age of the Crone Mother, which is more so of the shadow side of the divine feminine. But shadow is not necessarily equates to anything negative in that sense. But what you see now is this like this men with this knee-jerk reaction today, because they can feel that energy of the fifth dimensional consciousness, or that Saturn energy. They can see that, and it seems like they're reacting violently to that energy, is what I'm noticing, because they're mistaking what the Queen Mothership for misandry. So they're mistaking the Queen Mothership, or energy behind the Queen Mothership, rather, a return of this Saturn age. Because the history has been buried so much, and because there's a lack of understanding of melanated social structures, indigenous social structures before pre-colonial history, people are just taken aback of what's happening now, in terms of the age of Saturn, what that all means, and the misinterpretations behind that, and of course the propaganda behind taking certain concepts associated with planets and completely bastardizing them, taking them out of context, completely just jacking everything up. So we're dealing with that as well. But what's really happening is just the age of the Queen Mothership coming back, a governance that's the actual governance. So and I'll break that down, what that looks like in terms of enterprise architecture, where the men and the women, the roles that they play within that, because that's real shit, and that transcends any political agenda, that transcends the anything within this system that you think contributes to people's like social engineering. That this is very different than what you would ever see in terms of this is different from what you would ever see Western pedagogy promoting, and that needs to be very clear too, because there's ideologies colliding, because there's two systems being ushered in on this planet at once. And as we know, the planet you can never hold two vibrations at once, so something's got to give. So something is giving, but you see a lot of pushback within that. And my claim in reading to you like these tenets of the Queen Mothership is that if we understood the law of gender and melanated indigenous social structures, social systems, are in our own occult sciences, our own esoteric information about ways of being, about epistemology itself, then I don't believe that there would be a knee-jerk reaction to the great matriarch, or to this idea of the age of Saturn or the Queen Mothership. I don't think any melanated indigenous person would have a knee-jerk reaction to it if it was broken down in a way that was coherent. Whether the person came from Africa, whether they come from North America, South America, Australia, whatever. And the reason why I keep bringing up certain aspects that may be esoteric and occultic in nature is because in terms of this Queen Mothership governance, there was the priestess involved with that system, as well as the priesthood. But on ushering things out, there were a lot of rituals done to undo a lot of things as well, and that I don't need to get into, but that also contributed to the downfall of the Queen Mothership, because there were certain sacrifices that were made that created bondage around certain bloodlines. Maybe not mine, or maybe other people's bloodlines, but nonetheless there was a lot of energy that to stifle the voice of certain bloodlines as well. So moving along, so there's no secret that like in my early research as a scholar, I did focus on Africa pretty heavily. But even today, when I look back, I'm like, I do have some pretty divergent viewpoints at this point in some instances, today. However, I definitely enjoy doing the research. I don't even have much regrets, because I can see the game for what it is. And the overall arching goal was for me to understand the informational downloads that I was getting in terms of melanated power, in terms of this idea of a great matriarch being overthrown in the spiritual and the physical realm, I knew something was not adding up. And so I wanted to know, you know, this what was melanated people doing that even allowed the transatlantic slave trade? Like, what the fuck was going on? So my consciousness is expanded on a lot of things regarding research and regarding just ideas of knowing, you know, as far as epistemic beliefs and what we're told to think or whatever. And so that's expanded in a sense. But what I want you to take from this, whether you're from America, South America, Africa, whatever, what I want you to take from this, and I'm talking to melanated people, obviously, you know, it's either you are a powerful people or you are not, you know, in terms of the narratives that are being told. Either you are the parent on this planet, or you're the infant. When we get the narrative of assuming that the underdog equates to righteousness, that's a very skewed way of looking at power in the world, because the way it is now is not always going to be the way that it is. So in ushering in the age where you get into a position of power, or you start to come up with your own systems, you have to account for human nature. You have to account for what happens when power gets in the way. What happens when resources get in the way? What happens when money gets in the way? You have to assess for the human nature itself, instead of this hodgepodge. Well, once we get rid of the bad guys, once we get rid of white supremacy, we're going to waltz off into the sun. That's not going to be the case. Once that happens, everybody's going to be in a vie for power. And my thinking is, you know, is the system's going to benefit certain bloodlines? Who's going to get the raw end of the stick? It's going to be the Black American getting the raw end of the stick. We've already been getting the raw end of the stick for 500 years. Who's going to be getting, you know, who's going to try to oversee someone or try to dominate someone? You think that people not going to just be trying to dominate someone just because you got rid of white supremacy? You know, these are things that I really think about in my head, because I already know for a fact that this system is not going to be the way it is forever. So I'm like, well, how do you preserve your bloodline and your culture and your ethnicity? Like, how do you do that? You know, when them days come, you still gonna have to really work on a whole defense. You still gonna, and history tells you that, because you can see that in pre-colonial times. And so it's not like I just am conjuring up a narrative with no basis in reality. I am going to read you, I'm going to give you the names of some kingdoms right now. This book is just going to cover one landmass, but the next book is going to cover another landmass. It's going to cover North America. You're going to see the same shit, because human nature is human nature. It transcends a color. So you're going to see the same bullshit. I'll ask you this: either you're a powerful people or you're not. You know, either you're the parent race or you're not. What I want to say emphatically is, based on my conclusion, is that sometimes you can be powerful. Sometimes you may even be genius. You know, but if you get greedy, if you, in your quest for greed, in your quest for power, don't do all your blind spots, or you let your guard down to foreigners, or you take a deal that's the deal with the devil, or you just make one wrong move, and now the whole fate of history is just completely contorted. Everything is just switched. You can really fall off for a couple of centuries if you don't really keep your head on a swivel. You know, if you thinking that, okay, this person, you know, whatever, that a powerful system does not equate to righteousness, and that once you get rid of say the bad guy, does not mean that the underdog is righteous. So really what you need to be thinking of is like, okay, well, what were the things that got people into those situations? What are the things that we should avoid? It depends on where you're at in your walk in life, but what I do want to emphatically state that the level of thinking has to go deeper in terms of strategizing how you actually combat something, but also how you maintain power. And that is where the Queen Mothership comes in, as looking at melanated social structures to see what was going on. What the fuck was going on? How does a group of people, you know, who tell you themselves, they tell you themselves in their own institutions and their own, whether it's prestigious institutions and their own research, they tell you themselves that, hey, we're only about 40,000 years old. oh, hey, we've only, we've only been in existence. This is what they say about, this is what the white man tells you about himself. He also says that he's about 10% of the world's population. So I just don't see how melanated people can get conquered. I don't see how that could happen. How the hell your ass get smacked up like that by a group of people that's telling you themselves that they don't think they've been on this planet for more than 40,000 years? They telling you themselves. That ain't just make that up. I'm listening to what they tell me about themselves. They said they about 10,000 to 40,000 years old, based off of their epistemology, which is obviously, they go with, I believe they're using archaeology and anthropology to make that, to root their methodology under. So I'm like, oh, okay, this is what they telling you, and they got the nerve to they come up with all this carbon dating stuff they do to make the claims that they make. But whatever, even if we buy into it, even if we bought into like, oh, we found these early hominids that happen to be 3.5 million years, oh my gosh, we did the carbon dating. I mean, even if that's true, it's like, how did someone that's only 40,000 years old get the ups on you? Like, you know what I mean? Like, so that's even if we buy into that, which I have my thoughts on it, but I'm just making an analogy here. So I just want to know, I'm like, somewhere, somehow, somebody was in on this. Somewhere, somehow, the story not being told right. And somewhere down the line, these people were able to exploit some type of infighting, some type of tribalism, some type of social structure. Something happened. And what I'm saying is that Queen Mothership was overthrown. That was overthrown. And it did not just happen in Africa. Because from the scholars from North America, some of the women that do the research from North America, they are telling me out of their mouth that the same thing happened to their tribes over here. So something is just that to me is like, okay, well, shit, we got to do the Queen Mothership again. That's what that tells me. So my book just makes that claim that was clearly the demise. And that was one of the reasons for the demise. I absolutely make that claim via colonization and the slave trade. And again, once one headquarter gets knocked down, it becomes easier to knock the headquarter from other melanated people in the world and other land masses. Be it the dark-skinned people who've been in Australia, for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, the Jawar people, the North Centennial people in Asia, the brown-skinned people in the Americas. All of this headquarters got knocked down somehow, some way, and I don't buy what they just put in what they telling us that it was just the white man. No. And what I want to do now is, before I give the names and dates of the empires that I'm talking about, because I'm gonna give you like certain names and dates so that you can go and research yourself. I want to explain my evolution and my thought process today versus years ago when I was actually doing this research. But today, what I would like to do going forward is focus on the Queen Mothership from melanated people from the Americas, or what people call Black Americans. The next edition of this Queen Mothership book is only going to focus on North America, because we have elements of the system found in our culture. And we always talk about like, oh, these societies, our tribes were matriarchal. Like a lot of Black Americans tell me that many of their tribes were matriarchal, or their southern culture was more matriarchal. So I'm trying to understand, and this was pre, the single mother stuff, and I know that this is going to cause some confusion because people are going to think that I'm advocating for that when that's not what I'm talking about at all. I would be talking about pre-Lyndon B. Johnson era, mostly. I believe it was Lyndon B. Johnson. Lyndon B. Let me do some research real quick because I want to make sure I got the name of that president correct. Okay, yeah, so it was Lyndon B. Johnson. Yeah, so there was some quite of things that were going on during this time that kind of perverted some of the things that were going on. So this is not what I would be talking about. Anything after, I would say 1964 is not what I'm referring to by no stretch of the imagination. So let me make sure. I'm just making sure that this is the right Lyndon B. Johnson. Okay, so it is. So as far as like the updated version of this, I'm going to be talking about Black American oral histories from their big mamas, or their specific tribes. There's a lot of Black Americans who have told me that's what they're saying. They said my tribe was matriarchal in America, and I can tell you some things about that. I can tell you some tenets and some values of some of the things that were similar, some of the things that were different, and that was very like interesting to know. Now again, not all Black Americans share that same sentiment in terms of knowing their in terms of having a tribe, you know, or having that oral history being passed down, but nonetheless it is still interesting stuff, because I've come to the conclusion that it is relevant to Black Americans, not because it's to draw a correlation to any African pedagogy, just because those societies were matriarchal as well over here. So it's like, okay, so this has its unique style that I think is also worth documenting, you know what I mean? So we know now, like, when it comes to Black Americans and like this idea of the Queen Mothership, there's various histories within every individual that I have to take into account, but collectively I'm going to be focusing more so of like the admix. Obviously this idea of the Black American having a specific history based on their own records, but also of the fact that they have different admixtures itself, whether that be from the transatlantic slave trade, the Pacific slave trade, the Indian slave trade, the Blackamoors, European colonization, whatever it may be. There are going to be different admixtures within each individual, so I'm also accounting for that as well. But the addition to the Queen Mothership for North America, for Black Americans, it will be more so hinged on creating enterprise architecture, specifically of what the Queen Mothership will look like in 2022. So it's going to consist of building off of tenets and values, but to extrapolate them to like a broader framework, a unique framework for Black Americans, specifically for the men and the women, which they can benefit from, as well as action oriented like plans. So not just theory, like things that you can actually apply. Like, so I want to make sure that some component of this is applicable to today. So that is what the updated version will be about, and that is what that, you know, only I know what that looks like. So that's what I'll be writing about, rooted in the current specific needs of Black Americans. So that is what the second edition of the Queen Mothership will be. So now what I want to do, though, before I cover this edition of the Queen Mothership, I want to list the names of the melanated kingdoms who had these vast empires, like to lend credence to my point that the original people of the globe, the melanated people, were running global enterprise trade that backfired on them once the white man got involved. This was not, you know, just people sitting around idle. So I'm going to be giving you the name, the dates they existed, and whether the kingdoms were slave trading. This is the key here. We're trying to understand what was going on before the transatlantic slave trade. And what I'm going to be doing is, when I give you these names and the dates of these kingdoms, you're going to see, or it's going to be in chronological order, and all of these empires were selling slaves. So we're going to go back with the Aksum kingdom, because I think Kush obviously was 727, but we're not going to cover that far back. I don't really want to go that far back. I want to go with things that you can look at, where like there's like artifacts, there's like manuscripts, stuff that you can study for yourself. I don't want to go too far back, so we'll do Aksum kingdom. This is 400 CE. So obviously the Aksum kingdom, it was located off of the Horn of Africa. So it covers of what is now today Eritrea and Ethiopia. So the Aksum kingdom, obviously selling slaves. Now we have the South civilization, which was the 6th BC to 1600 AD. And this was now modern day Chad. So these people, they were specialized in like bronze, they were specialized in copper and iron, but also selling slaves. So now we have Ghana, obviously from 300 to 1100 CE, and I believe this the former empire of Ghana was called Wagado. Their first king was Dinga Sisi. So you can go and look this up. Dinga, the first king there was Dinga Sisi, and one of the main tribes from this empire was the Soniki people. They were united under that king that I just said. So the next one is the kingdom of Mampungwe. I'm probably pronouncing this shit wrong. That is from 1075 to 1220. So this is where Zimbabwe would be. Again, selling slaves. So now we have Mali, 1240 to 1645. And this was founded by Sundiata Keita. We all probably heard of Sundiata Keita before. But, you know, he ran a very centralized government. He was well trained. They had a massive military, massive army, and they were colonizers. And they had a fleet that was like one of the largest seen in Africa. Again, they were, in addition to selling like ivory, copper, iron, a lot of salt, and a lot of gold. Clearly, huge slavery happening, selling slaves. So now we have the Songhai Empire, which a lot of us would be familiar with. That's 1464. Obviously, the ruler of the Songhai Empire was Sunni Ali. He was a prince. And he was also held as a political prisoner by the Mali Empire for some time. And obviously they were practicing slavery. And in 1493, Askia Muhammad, he also became the leader of the Songhai, and he brought the Songhai Empire to like their highest heights of the Askia dynasty through selling slaves and conquering the surrounding lands, and even taking control over the gold and salt trade of the Mali Empire. Now again, all of this information that's about the slave stuff, I didn't even put in the Black Man series. I left it all out because I think I might have put it in there, but I mean, I covered like the good stuff and then just glossed over that. But like all of these empires, once again, just because it was a functioning civilization does not mean that it was just righteous. You know, they were selling slaves. So as far as like the government of the Songhai Empire in itself, it was divided into 5 provinces, and each had a governor. They also had judges, their own town chiefs, and the emperor obviously had total control, but they also had ministers who ran different aspects of the empires for them. And you see, at this time, the Queen Mothership was gone. I mean, it was overthrown. We're talking about now we're in 1493. So now we're going to go to the Kanem Empire. This was 700 to 1376. So this is now modern day. This is modern day Chad, but it's also the southern parts of Libya, eastern Niger, northeastern Nigeria, northern Cameroon. So that's how big the Kanem Empire was. Once again, selling slaves. So now we have the Ajuran Empire. That's the 13th to the late 17th century. Late 17th century. I mean, you know, there's a lot of records. Selling slaves. Bornu Empire, 1380 to 1893. Very vast empire, selling slaves. The Shuluk Kingdom, 15th century. The Bagorim Kingdom, 16th to 17th century. The Luba Empire, 1585 to 1889. This is now, his name was King Kongolo. He ruled around 1585. Yeah, so, I mean, like, I think you guys get the point. Like, the Wadai Empire, 1635 through 1912, selling slaves. The Lunda Empire, 1665 to 1887, selling slaves. And now I'll just do one more. Sokoto Caliphate. So they were in rulership from 1804 to 1903. So this is where you get the House of Kingdoms, and they were over about 10 million people in this region at this time, and they had about 2.5, is estimated about 1 to 2.5 million slaves who were captured during the Fulani War. This was before the British got over there. The British came over there in 1901, so they did fight for like 2 years to try to, and they ended up, the Sokoto Caliphate ended up losing, but that amount of slaves, that was before British came over there, so or even conquered them. So again, I just wanted to cover the kingdom so you can see for yourself that, you know, there's not a reach to say that. You can look this stuff up for yourself. There's plenty of artifacts, manuscripts, things that have been transliterated. Of course, even some of the information itself comes from their very own institutions, because what happened was a lot of times the nobility class, if they knew they were getting conquered and they knew that it was kind of like they want to have their name left in etched in stone and tell the history of their people, they did commission scholars to not just know the oral history, but to document it down, and they were to hide it in vaults. They were to hide certain information so that, you know, I guess one day someone would find it to be able to tell the story. Or they did keep stuff in certain palaces, even if they did become, you know, part of a puppet banana republic, you know, if they got conquered in that sense and they didn't get killed, and they decided to go along with whatever was happening. Oh, they shit was well documented, you know, like, and it's very fascinating because obviously this stuff is not going to be taught in any education system. Like they say that the king of Benguri, for instance, decided to hire like 50, I think it was like 50 scholars, maybe it's just like 50 to 80 scholars to just write down all of their history, like everything that you could ever think of, like even their language, like to translate they knew English, they translated their language and everything, and still have it to this day. You know, it's still over there. It's not even in like a British museum or in a European museum or anything. It's like they still have that research out there that you can go to the museum and visit it and get access to it. So, you know, it's interesting stuff there. You know, it's so and I say that because a lot of times when we talk about like ancient history, it's like, well, where are you getting that information from? Like, where did you find that from? Where's your sources for that? There are different databases that if you have access, like say like a JSTOR or even like somebody's libraries that's owned by like say the Ivy League institutions, whatever, they will have like sources that you can get your damn hands on that would be hard pressed to find, you know, say just in your average bookstore. You know, it's as simple as that. It's unfortunate. So like what I did was I took screenshots of some of the information, some of like the sources and stuff that I was able to pull up from another database, like another like digital archives that this library had. And I remember like screenshotting the book titles and stuff and making sure that I could relay that information. And in one of those videos from the Black Man series, I literally just go through like each source, like, you know, like just saying like, hey, look at this, look at these, you know, and I say pause, and you know, I think I ask the viewers to take screenshots as well, because there's some really odd stuff going on. And then, you know, in terms of like the North American history, that's just like completely, you know, buried. You know, it's like it's really uncanny. Like we can get our hands on at least some of the African shit, but it's like when it comes to really understanding like the great matriarch over here in North America, it gets even more harder because we were the direct result of a degendering process via slavery. So the institution of slavery itself led to a lot of the burial of some of the way the tribes here were practicing the Queen Mothership. So that is something to take into account. There are individuals who express to me that they do know what their tribe was doing and that they are able to elucidate on the social structures of their own tribe. So that's, you know, some interesting stuff. So now we're going to go just a little bit deeper into like the Sibyls, like this idea of the Queen Mothership. So the Queen Mothers, you know, they were considered like the protectors of the kings, and they held a lot of like organizational power and final decision-making power. So there were multiple wars, you know, between men and women for power, you know, and unfortunately, like say, for instance, in Benin, there was a war, you know, between black men and women, like literally, and Queen Idia won the war. You know, so in another tribe, you know, you have a situation where the black women were not winning. They were getting burnt alive. They were getting sex trafficked and their breasts chopped off. So, you know, in those situations, so various tribes went through various different histories, like all over the globe. And this started, a lot of the sex trafficking started out of this too. Now, this is very uncomfortable for people to talk about, and people say, well, that wasn't my tribe doing that. That wasn't my tribe. No, it may not have been. It may not have been your tribe doing that. So lucky you. And then you can argue, like, for, say, certain bloodlines, they have no attachment to any of this at all. So in that sense, then this would not even be relevant. But what you need to take from this is that there was a series of systematic actions and techniques done to overthrow this Queen Mothership. It did not happen overnight. It was a process that was slow. There was a process where collaborators were in on it, even from women themselves being in on it. There were women themselves that they figured if they helped the other side, they can be put in a position of power over those queen mothers. Maybe they didn't like them. Maybe they were a bitch. You never know. But we can prove that when this nobility fell and the system of diarchy was dismantled, we can see the course and the tide of history turn right before our very eyes. And there is a lot of evidence of a diarchy system. So again, I talk about the Queen Mothership, for one, so that we're not infantilizing melanated people globally, but also so that we can see how to develop enterprise architecture that is indigenous to ourselves, that is not westernized. So that's another reason why I focused on this so much, because a lot of times the way the history is being told is so that melanated people themselves do not dig deep into, like, this whole subjugation thing, this whole colonization stuff, and it is being told so that one person gets obviously, so that one person gets off the hook. And we're being told, that we were like these cherubim angels, and that all this stuff got caused by other people, when they are the infant. So it's like, where did they learn this from? Who is the father? Like, who? Like, it's just like, we're not telling, like, it doesn't, stuff is just not adding up, so that's why it's like, well, either you're a powerful people or you're not. Either you were sitting ducks in the hut, or you were not, or you were the one that was making power moves and something, and you made one wrong move. Some people did just get colonized. Some indigenous tribes, some melanated tribes of the globe, probably were really sitting ducks. I think that if anybody was minding their own business, it probably was people in the Americas, and people that got caught up as collateral damage and all of this nonsense. That's what I think at the end of the day happened. I really do. And then I think within North America themselves, they might have been, the people here might have been making deals to cut deals or doing shit, to the queen mothers, to the councils over there. Maybe there was something going on similar, but the sitting duck narrative is just a way to assuage from the guilt of having a hand in all of this. And it is what it is. And it is what it is. And then the question is, either you had a superior civilization or you did not. Either you had, if you want me to believe that you had a superior civilization, or you were a sitting duck that got your ass conquered. So it's one or the other. And that's just what we have to think of anytime, like, a lot of the scholars like to romanticize those African kingdoms and want to romanticize, this is where we all descend from. We were all kings and queens and stuff. Some people were kings and queens. The rest of the motherfuckers were just farming, commoners, iron smelters, the priesthood, the merchant class, whatever, That's really how it goes. Well, most people live in a feudal lifestyle. But that's a component of it. But then, to this romanticization, when it's like, well, if they had all these civilizations and they was that powerful, how the fuck did all this happen? Why in 2022 is Africa looking the way it's looking, and how come melanated people is still facing the side effects of colonialism? It wasn't just because somebody showed up with a gun. Are you kidding me? Like, that is insane. When you have an invoice and a record of one damn tribe somewhere, a melanated tribe somewhere, go with an invoice from damn China with gunpowder himself in the 1300s, like in the 1200s. Like, get real. Tell the story correctly or don't tell it at all. Tell everything that happened is my thing, and we talk about, like, these superior civilizations, and my thing is, don't romanticize it, because That's the strategy. That's what you need to be studying to see, well, what if you're going to study that, if you're going to study those civilizations and those kingdoms, you need to be looking at what went wrong. You need to be looking at how did all this pop off like this? Like, nah, something ain't adding up here. So what happened? What really happened? And again, a superior civilization does not equate to righteousness. Look at how powerful America is. Look at how powerful France was at one point. You know, did it not have deep flaws, deep oppression, acts done to get the level of power that the level of what you have to do to maintain that power? So what I am saying is that by virtue of being human and as melanated people, that you too understood at one point understood the power game and knowledge of what it takes to create and run highly advanced civilizations, regardless of what landmass they are on. That's what you need to understand. However, when you start to study the history, you may see interlopers with foreigners, with other bloodlines, with different systems, with maybe different systems of morality, different systems of what it means to trust or to hold your word, or what it means to beef at one point and didn't be able to later down the line to do trade or whatever. Some certain people may not have that value system. Certain bloodlines don't have that system. So shit can backfire. It can backfire on a spiritual and a physical realm. I argue that's what we've been going through. But that overthrow of that Queen Mothership and fucking with them Sibyls, that was a huge ripple effect, and that I'm not letting go, because I've seen it, and I'm starting to see it here in North America with the studying of the North American history. So I'm on to something with this melanated indigenous system, and I'm going to shed some light to it, and I'm going to expound on it. I'm going to extrapolate from it. I'm going to do even more research, not just from the African perspective. So what I want to do is I'm going to name you some of the tribes and empires of the Queen Mothership that I covered in the book, and then we're just going to go into tenets and values that I came up with, stuff that I came up with as a part of my mindset. It's a part of my nature to extrapolate and add on to information. Like, you really see me out regurgitate stuff. I don't mind that, but it's like, hey, how do you construct your own theories around this? How do you construct your own body of knowledge to what's applicable today? So that's just my nature. If I'm going to be studying history, it's for a reason. I'll rarely just study history because I think it's fun. It's a strategy. But again, let's start. So here are some of the tribes that were covered in the book itself. So I covered the Ashanti women. I also covered like the people of Ndago and Mantaba. I covered pre-colonial Igbo society, which is obviously Nigeria. That honestly was extremely fascinating because their Queen Mothership, some of their people, like the elders in their family, are still alive to talk about like the remnants of before like the British had really just done damage over there. But some of the women, there was a researcher, she was obviously Igbo. She collated some of the oral histories from their elders before they passed on, like, cause it was the last of getting that information. And it was so interesting. She published it, and she was talking about how like the women were really how the women remembered this Queen Mothership system, and how it changed, and how the Queen Motherships were removed, and how it was like this concerted effort to kind of do away with that. Theirs was like that was extreme, because I'm like, there is no way, like but I do have to say that the way the Queen Mothership looked like in that particular tribe was pretty cool. And then I covered the Akan tradition, the Beni tradition, the Burundi tribe, the Dohamian tradition, which was the Kingdom of Congo, the Kushite people, the Berbere tribe, the Serer tribe, the Swazi tribe of South Africa, the Tswana people, and certain parts of obviously Egypt had certain remnants of this Queen Mothership throughout their history. It had a lot of male rulerships, but when we talk about the Queen Mothership, like in Egypt, it looks a bit different because they had some female rulers. Again, this is a traditional multi-governance matrix. That's pretty much what it is. And there are some geographical attributes that contribute to such a system. in terms of the weather and the need for like higher agricultural output, but also because the land itself necessitated that, you know, wherever there is tropical weather. So you have to think of it that way. So wherever there is tropical weather, and you need somebody, you're going to need both parties, both genders playing their role, doing their part. So obviously, like, the women, they oversaw the growing and harvesting of crops, you know, so they were looked to as like the keepers of the food, and they were also in charge of like the water supply. So and, you know, so that sort of egalitarian system comes about because of the location itself. If you rely solely on the men to grab the food and to do everything, the hunting, to do then the agricultural output, the productivity goes down. So it wasn't a big deal for the women to do the agricultural work. During this time, we also see that the women were given jurisdiction over like the judicial affairs, believing that women were able to provide balance. So there's actually like some studies, you know, where they're done to show like how pretty much they conclude that women can balance things on their head better, that they can balance on beams better, but like anything with balance, like even if you watch that show Survivor, any challenge that had to do with balance, most of the time the women would win. The men would win sometimes, but certain like certain things that certain challenges that just men are known for winning because of the way the processing of the brain. But when it comes to anything that has to do with like balancing on the beam, balancing water on head, balancing stuff, it's actually been empirically proven now, like in today's research, that women have better balance. So, but back then, indigenous tribes, through whatever reason, maybe through their own experimentations themselves and their own things that they were researching, made that conclusion as well. But they took it those levels. What indigenous people do, if you don't realize, is they take concrete concepts, concrete understanding, and can bring it to the abstract level to how they govern themselves. And that is a very profound way of viewing the world. You root it in stuff that is empirical. You're rooting it in stuff that is evidential. And that is so then you're obviously using nature as a soundboard for that. But anytime you see concrete concepts, you know, something that you can see with your damn eye and bring it to the abstract level of how to run a whole system, that is very profound thinking. Now, indigenous people, melanated people, whether they are in America, whether they are in Africa, whether they are in South America, wherever they are, some melanated people at, I've noticed that tendency to do that pre-colonial times. That is the tendency to do that, to take a concrete concept and extrapolate it to an abstract concept, to run things, to actually make a plan. Other ways that we think is on ideograms, pictograms, as well as cyclical thinking, you know. So we think about thought processes, and you know, I've really am big on studying this type of stuff. I can see the difference between someone with a linear mind, cyclical mind, and there's also research about this as well. And so like a lot of anthropologists or people who's doing research, like say, you know, in the way Black Americans preach, or just Black American sermons, speech writing, there's been research done on that, so that the conclusion is that the thinking process is extremely cyclical. You make a point, and then you circle back around that point. You make a point, you add more information on it, more context, more analogy, then you tell your story again, and you circle back to that point. So by the time the story is done, you don't realize that you heard the same point throughout a whole story at the same time, but with different information. And you know, so believe it or not, a lot of speech writing classes, and when I took a speech class before, we were studying that process. Like, we were building our speeches based off of the way Southern Black American pastors give speeches. That was very, 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 very fascinating. That was so cool. But yes, that is a thing. Like, as far as like understanding the way you think, the processing, cyclical processing, ideograms, pictograms, as well as taking concrete level concepts and bringing it to the abstract level. That is the way melanated people think, and particularly Black Americans. So that's just an observation. It doesn't mean that I'm pushing any agenda. It's just an observation. Just let it be at that. Don't take it anywhere else with it. But in addition to like the judicial affairs, the women would judge like marital conflicts. Even some of the policing, communal policing, that was really interesting, because man, if you do something wrong in some of these tribes, you get an ass spanking, like with a stick, like a paddle to the ass. So that was very funny to see that, because these were not kids, these were adults getting paddled to the ass if they did something crazy, and it was the queen mothers doing it. And of course, a lot of the administrative tasks and shamanism were done by the women too. Now, as far as the men, it was traditional roles: hunting, craftsmen, obviously building architectures, textile making, warrior class, based off of pragmatism. Again, this is not a system that neither be romanticized but merely extrapolated upon and added on to based on things that make sense today. So if you do want to know more about like the history of the Queen Mothership, because again, I'm moving away from the history of the Queen Mothership to building an architectural framework that can be applied today. So that is where my mind is at now. But if you are wanting to know more about like the history of the Queen Mothership for your own edification as a woman or as a man, you can watch that part 1 that's on here. The part 1 is on here, and it's still really popular. Mostly like Africans like it, and Black Americans like to learn from it. And it's for individuals who are looking for more context as to what factors contributed to the colonization, like what was going on before the transatlantic slave trade, and what the hell was going on, with the Great Matriarch, and as far as like these family units and their social structures, like what was going on. And it is for those who seek transcendence beyond like Western conceptions of gender dynamics, and again, the tenets and value systems that I write come from my own source. It comes from myself, extrapolating on what I've studied, pretty much, and what I research. And again, what I'll be doing is taking these tenets and values that I came up with from 2 years ago, and I'm going to put them in a actual framework, specifically rooted in North America. It's going to be focused on North America, Black Americans, and it will be something that we can do together. And it's as simple as that. So now what I'm going to do is read the tenets and the values that I wrote in my book. And my intention, again, is not to push things on people. I never push things on people. I don't try to convert nobody to anything. Rather, I'm concerned with resonance and building with people with the same resonance as me. I don't necessarily try to convert people to anything or try to convince, you need to see it my way. I don't really give a shit about that. With me, it's like I'm just a mere expression of consciousness, on a transitory journey on this planet. I'm not married to any ideas strongly, because that's how I stay intelligent, by understanding that, like this concept that we call knowledge. It's kind of laughable, when you attribute it to a human being, like Sun Ra had told us. It's like, well, what does any of that mean? So to me, it's like we're gonna go through transitory phases. We'll go through things, and so the idea is not to push anything on anybody. So to me, it's more so like, okay, here I am as an expression of consciousness. Every mind is a universe. Every mind has a vibratory nature. You have to do what your bloodline is programmed to do. So that's what I'm doing. And on that journey, it's like, if I'm resonating with you, you can, learn from me, I can learn from you. But I don't like the idea of like, oh, you're wrong and this is what I'm saying is right, and this is, I don't give a shit about that. It's like, here's the resonance, here's the dial that I'm on, here's the frequency that I'm on, and you want to tune into the channel or not. It is simple as that. So let's begin, because what we want to do, again, is to really focus on like some enclaves that we want to see and live in. Because again, when we talk about a theoretical framework in an architecture, specifically applying the Queen Mothership in 2022, we have to think of like, what does that take, and like, okay, how do we want that enclave to look like? What do we actually want to see in our communities? What do we want to live in? And this goes for men and women, and children, obviously. So this is where my focus is at. So let's begin. I'm just going to start now. So the list details 20 reasons why the Nakhti Queen Mothership should exist. It is a philosophy that should be dynamic and based on discipline, precision, truth, logic, and spirit. So dynamic just means changing. The dynamic means evolving, like that. It's not going to stay static. It's nothing meant to stay stagnant. And that with logic, with precision, with the truth, and with discipline, then the Nakhti Queen Mothership can be beneficial in today's time. So the Nakhti Queen Mothership aims to empower Black American women, restore balance and harmony between the masculine and feminine principle, restore balance within child rearing by becoming the first teachers of our children and promoting inductive learning, restore self-love within Black women, restore balance on earth by promoting a clean environment, the safety of wildlife, and the plant kingdom, restore the sisterhood among Black women to have sustainable and genuine love for one another and ourselves. Restore the image of the Black woman by promoting her natural beauty without seeking validation or approval from society. Teach young boys, girls, and adults to take accountability for their community. Honor tradition. Become in tune with nature. Stop the abuse and disrespect and degradation of Black women. Raise our standards in our love life and never settle. Promote the nuclear family units and marriage before having children. Promote balance and healthy manhood that protects and supports the community. Practice self-sufficiency. Undo centuries of oppressive brainwashing. Promote the safety and livelihood of Black women. Obtain the knowledge needed to activate the light codes in her proverbial sons, Black men, which means becoming in tune with the energy of Saturn and the dark goddess. And number 20 is restore the nature of the Black man by activating light codes as a baby and in their child rearing. So that just means the Shiva energy, them understanding the principles of the divine masculine based on the laws of electromagnetism and what we see in the animal kingdom and with our naked eye. So again, that is not the tenets. That is just like, well, what are the aims of this Queen Mothership? I wrote this 2 years ago, and when I do the update, we're going to be talking about like more of like the community building aspect of it, like actual like stuff about like more of like the economic empowerment component of it, because there's some things where you can really have you can really build out a governance that accounts for the actual sustenance of an entire village, of an entire community. So that is where I would go with it now in terms of like what I know now versus what I knew then. So that is what it aims to do. And again, the updated version just tells the Black woman that she needs to understand her role in this community and the power that she has, as well as understanding that the intransigence and not respecting a code of conduct in terms of the sisterhood. To be honest, you kind of do a disservice to yourself by that, because then the community becomes so male identified. To me, I argue that the reflection of the complaints that you have in terms of the treatment by the men in terms of feeling undervalued, underappreciated, I do make the case that that is a manifestation of the internalized feelings that you feel towards yourself, that gets projected out into this community en masse. And I do make the argument that if Black women were to do the shadow work needed to uncover some of our own dark side, as well as some of the things within that shadow that is completely suppressed in terms of the creativity, the organizational abilities, the genius, if that was steered more in the direction of where it once was in terms of understanding your own power, then that could translate into you deciding what you want your whole community to look like. And I do make that case that lack of sisterhood and that lack of self-love is what contributes to part of the breakdown, because this community is entirely too male identified, and the women are not the women are not awakened in their divine feminine. But I don't think that that looks the Western way. I know that when men say that, they think that or when women typically say that, they think that means, oh, this Western concept of that. I'm totally looking at this from the indigenous aspect of it, of what that means for that energy to lie dormant, that feminine energy to lie dormant. Looks very different for Black women, and this community has not accepted that, and I don't think they may not be aware of it. Maybe you are aware of it, maybe you're not, but that dormant that tendency for the community itself to suppress that dark energy of the divine feminine is what's causing it's causing a lot of breakdown, because it's like, if it was not the case, I'm almost positive we would be out of this situation, out of this subjugation that we find ourselves in. We would be out of it. And I truly believe that with every fiber in my heart, that if we've relied on our own systems that we've came up with in our own indigenous ways, and we really understood what happened before pre-colonialism, what we were doing, what was working, what was not working, what steps went wrong. I truly believe wherever you're at as a melanated person, wherever tribe you belong to as a melanated person, I absolutely believe that we would be more in positions of power if we understood what that meant to release and to activate that energy in the divine feminine, but also the dormant energy in the divine masculine. It looks very different for us though, and that does not mean that there are no gender roles, or that the men are not bred with to fight and fuck and to have this brute force. We see that in the animal kingdom. That's a real thing. Like that's biological hardwiring. Some of the nature of man is just hardwiring. I'm not taking that away from anyone. Same with the women. Like there's a lot of stuff that is concrete, man. But my issue is when we start to try to finesse things via religion and via things that are oppressive to any gender. And that is where my pushback is at, because even with the Queen Mothership, men are not to be oppressed in that system. You know, children are not to be oppressed. Women are not to be oppressed in that system. So my thing is, whatever humans decide to do, and particularly Black Americans, whatever you decide to do, however you decide to run your social structures, you have to have the check and balances and certain councils to check certain elements of power, because it will become corrupted. Whether that is the women, whether that is the men, it needs to be things in place. There needs to be diarchal balance, and there needs to be representatives of each counterpart of each gender and each level of hierarchy within new social structures. I do make that case. I make that argument. I can prove that on paper, and that's what I need to do. I need to actually write more theories around this that Black Americans can say, oh, okay, I could see how that could work. I could take this and I can do something with this. That's where we're going with this. So now we're going to cover the tenets of the Queen Mothership. So the Nakhti Queen Mothership aims to build cultural values centered on self-love, respect, discipline, spirit, balance, logic, precision, and knowledge of self. Below, list the principles. Both genders will understand that their roles are complementary, cooperative, pragmatic, compassionate, and built on reciprocation. Both genders will recognize the power that the masculine and feminine principles possess and respect their essence equally, while understanding that gender roles will be based on pragmatism and what is best for individual families. So this is like written verbatim in the book. So I don't think this shouldn't be losing anybody. It's not like it's some crazy. I think when people hear the Queen Mothership, they're like, oh, we're going back into misandry. You know, they think something crazy. But I'll keep going. Both genders will understand that the Black woman is the first being on the planet. She is the creator of humanity and the creator of the original Black man, whose mitochondrial DNA and 9-month incubation period in her womb allow her son to exist in a third dimensional realm. Very highly controversial information. You know, when we were in the conscious community, we were really learning certain information you stick with, certain information you move on from. this one is staying in there. It is staying in there because we're proving through the laws of electromagnetism and through the science of how babies evolved, as far as like the way the fetus evolves into whether it's going to be a boy and a girl. I'm keeping that in there because there is a science behind that. A lot of that stuff that was coming from that conscious community, a lot of stuff is janky. A lot of stuff just be, you know, what people done extrapolated from something. But I have heard this thinking in indigenous creation stories, melanated creation stories, and particularly, like, you know, we talk about like Tiamat and you know, like the 99 goddesses and the 9 women that sit on the count. Like a lot of the stories, like some of the stuff that we be getting from, it probably comes from some creation story. Both genders will respect their ancestors, gods, or / nature, because there's some people that don't believe in God and life. So both genders will respect their ancestors, nature, and life. If I was to rewrite that, I would probably remove the word gods. But there are a lot of people that still believe in God, so, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. The next one is both genders will emphasize the importance of vitamin D synthesis from the sun due to increased melanin levels, and will spend time in the sun. So that is just the sunbathing aspect, you know, getting sunlight, and whatnot. And then the next one is both genders will encourage healthy eating amongst each other and support one another in making lifestyle changes and limiting recreational drugs and alcohol to social activities. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. I think this is a little too strict, if you ask me. It'd be good. I mean, and to be honest, when we do our Queen Mothership, I'm letting you know this right now, and you can get this on the record. When we do our Queen Mothership, there's only going to be drinking on Friday and Saturdays. So the rest of the week you will not be allowed to drink in the Queen Mothership, because we have building to do during the week. Like we have to do a lot of building. We have a lot of things to do. So I figure, you know, the liquor store is only going to be open on Fridays and Saturdays, guys. So you only have 2 days to party, you know. But I figure, you know, we have a lot to do. So let me keep going. Both genders will understand that males tend to inherently have more muscle mass than women, and this is fact, thus making it unwise for men to hit women and children physically. Instead, they should use their increased muscle mass to lift heavy items. So 95% of men have more muscle mass in their arms than women. So obviously violence should be frowned upon, and that's pretty much what that's saying, and that they should be building shit with that's what they were designed for. Both genders will understand that black manhood must be restored and learned anew through wisdom, mystery science, queen mothers, and ancestors and intergalactic beings. Both genders would know the basics of human survival at its core. Survival means at least knowing how to live off nature if needed. This knowledge can be obtained through learning to grow your own food. In addition, survival entails knowing the basic of building an outdoor shelter, knowing how to make a water filtration device, and knowing the basic of clothing the body and keeping warm. So that's just like prepping and survival. Like that's just like, you know how people be making fun of them doomsday people. I guess I would go in that category. But yeah, that's pretty much like knowing how to start a fire, how to build an A-frame shelter, how to clean your own water if you get stuck out in the woods and stuff like that. That again something, this a tenet like that, you can build a whole framework just off of that one tenet alone. Both genders should know the basic of I already read that one. Both genders will understand that the daughter and son are to be loved and raised with discipline, joy, ethics, high science, and knowledge of self. Children will embrace education, hard work, community, and creative expression. I think that's something that is pretty self-explanatory. Both genders will understand that children can talk to parents about anything and voice their perspectives with logical reasoning during discussion. So that's pretty much just giving the children the ability to just express themselves, you know, without any restraints, you know, in the community, like where they don't feel like they have to hide stuff, they don't feel like they have to lie about shit. It's better, you know, to foster that in the child. So but making sure that their reasoning is logical, you know. So that is something that I put in there for whatever reason. I guess that's what was really important to me at the time. I think I was actually raising a kid in my family, so that's why I believe I put that in there. Both genders will understand that confidence cannot be built by comparing oneself to others or tearing others down to make yourself feel better. It's a big one. That's a huge one. Both genders will understand that the black man must be willing to be enlightened by highly intelligent queen mothers, elders, and intergalactic beings. Lord have mercy. Both genders. I guess I just meant myself. Because again, this is like pulling teeth, you know. Both genders will practice caution against black women who are jealous-hearted. The black man should not encourage the gossiping about other black women for no discernible reason and no wrongdoing on the part of the black woman being gossiped about. Instead, he should refer her back to the Nakhti tenets and remind her of the importance of not defaming her image and sisterhood. Both genders will stop holding black women to ridiculous standards via being overly critical and judgmental for no reason. So that was when we saw all this stuff about like the black women getting slandered on Twitter. Black women, there was like this thing called Make a Black Woman Cry Day that was going viral on Twitter some time back, and I remember it was something that a lot of the women were discussing back then. A lot of the women were discussing a lot of the things that were going on with the manosphere with social media, I guess, like with some certain nefarious actors that were like just making videos about black. I think it was like Tommy Sotomayor and a couple of other guys. I think they're like not even on YouTube anymore. I'm not even sure. But yeah, at that time, like this was going ushered out of that period. And I remember it being like really still important to me. Like I'm like, why is this all this judgment, you know? Both genders will understand that the black man must be willing to sacrifice to protect his manhood, and that is very important in this day and age. In order for them to get their power, they're going to have to do a lot of standing up. They're going to have to do a lot of sacrificing in order to see themselves restored. Both genders will understand that the black man must revere and adore the image of his mother and that of his own. He will stand up and never cower. Both genders will understand that they should never forgive someone who has no remorse for the wrong they have done for them. I'm going to read that again. Both genders will understand that they should never forgive someone who has no remorse for the wrong they have done to them. That to me, I think I actually put that in one of my philosophy books because that is very important. Both genders will understand that it is imperative to defend themselves if physically attacked by outsiders. That should be common sense. Both genders will understand that the golden rule and the inverse of the rule is the same. Do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. And the equal of that is do unto others as they have done unto you. So you got to do both. Do unto others as they have done unto you. You got to do both. And do unto others as you would want them to do unto you. Don't just follow the light part of that rule. Follow the equal and opposite part of that rule, which is if you do unto others as they have done unto you. That is the tenets of the Queen Mothership. What would be updated is probably to say Black American role will be updated, and the new version would probably, because I know that a lot of Black Americans, they're coming into different consciousness and it's happening rapidly. So with me, I own like the copy. I own the publishing to everything I've ever written. I have like no backing of any sort, so I can just go in and just change my manuscript and just republish the shit. It's, you know, it's like it's really no big deal. I can take the shit off the air. I can do whatever I want with it. So what I would do is I would change some languages when I update this manuscript and go in and etch and sketch some things out, add some things in. But for the new complete second version of this, it's going to be completely different. That's going to just be theoretical. But that one is going to be like more like diagrams, like more like concept maps and organizational structure shit, you know, like actual like maps, schematics. that one's going to be like actual schematics and not so much like a lot of text and stuff like that. It's going to just be like building out an entire framework that is relevant for 2022, and that one's only going to be for North America. It's only going to be for Black Americans. But this particular one is for melanated people, but specifically for those in Africa. Those who are also just interested, they could learn from that Queen Mothership as well. And then I most likely will just go in there and update the manuscript and republish it, because I think I've already did that once, so it's not a big deal, you know. The second version, there will be like a strong demarcation between the continents and between North America Queen Mothership, because I won't be mixing the two. Like, I won't be saying like, oh, these two are the same and these two need to mix. I will not be doing that in that second edition. And the one that I do will focus solely on enterprise architecture. That will be for the unique circumstances of our time. So again, this is only a portion of the book. So if you want more information, you can support me by buying the book. And I love you. Thank you for listening, and I will talk to you later. Bye.